Picture this: a knight clad in shining armor, sworn to defend the Holy Lands, vanishes without a trace in the midst of the Crusades. No battle claimed him, no chronicle recorded his fate, just whispers of his name, fragments of his story, and a mystery that has lingered for centuries. This is the tale of a man lost to time, a puzzle wrapped in the dust of ancient conflicts, and a question that still haunts historians today. What happened to the knight who disappeared? The Crusades were a tumultuous era where faith and fury collided, and countless lives were swept into the tide of history. Yet among the many stories of glory and tragedy, this knight's vanishing stands out not just for its mystery, but for what it reveals about the fragile line between legend and reality. His absence echoes through the centuries, a silent challenge to uncover the truth. Was he betrayed? Did he abandon his cause? Or did something far more extraordinary befall him? The clues are scant, scattered across faded manuscripts and half-remembered accounts, but they whisper of a story waiting to be pieced back together. This isn't just a journey into the past, it's an invitation to step into the role of detective, to sift through the shadows of history alongside us. From the dusty archives of medieval Europe to the cutting-edge tools of modern investigation, we'll follow every lead, unravel every clue, and ask the questions that have gone unanswered for too long. Along the way, we'll uncover not just the fate of one man, but the broader tapestry of faith, war, and identity that shaped an entire age. So ready your curiosity and sharpen your wits, because the story of the vanished knight is about to unfold, and it's far stranger, far more compelling than you might ever have imagined. The legend of the vanished knight begins not with silence, but with whisper stories passed down through generations, each retelling adding new layers to the mystery. In the villages near his homeland, some claimed he was spirited away by divine forces, punished for straying from his sacred oath. Others insisted he fled the battlefield, abandoning his brothers in arms to seek a hidden fortune. But the most haunting version, that he simply walked into the desert one night, never to be seen again, as if the sands themselves swallowed him whole. These tales weren't just idle gossip. They were woven into the fabric of medieval life, a reflection of the deep unease that gripped societies when their protectors vanished without explanation. Medieval chronicles offer scant details, but their omissions speak volumes. One account from a monk in Acre mentions a knight of noble bearing who vanished during a routine patrol, his armor found neatly stacked beside a barren olive tree, no signs of struggle, no footprints leading away. Another, penned decades later, describes a shadowy figure seen wandering the ruins of fallen castles, clad in tattered surcoat, forever searching for something lost. Over time, these fragments blurred into legend, morphing the knight from a man into a symbol, a cautionary tale about duty, faith, and the fragile nature of honor in a world ravaged by war. Knights weren't just warriors, they were the embodiment of order in a chaotic age. Their sudden disappearances struck at the heart of medieval society, undermining the very ideals they were sworn to uphold. Imagine the terror of a community whose defenders simply ceased to exist, no body to mourn, no enemy to blame, just a void where certainty once stood. This knight's story resonated because it mirrored the anxieties of an era defined by upheaval, where even the mightiest could be erased in an instant. To understand his disappearance, we must step into the maelstrom of the Crusades, a clash of empires, faiths, and identities that reshaped the medieval world. The Holy Wars were not just battles, they were odysseys of survival where knights faced thirst, disease, and betrayal as often as enemy blades. In this cauldron of chaos, vanishing wasn't just possible, it was almost expected. Men drowned in rivers, succumbed to fever, or deserted under cover of darkness, their fates buried beneath the weight of larger conflicts. Yet our knight's story endures because it defies easy explanation, a riddle wrapped in the contradictions of an age where myth and history walked hand in hand. The Crusades were not just wars, they were a storm of ambition, faith, and desperation that reshaped the medieval world. Imagine a time when kings and peasants alike answered the call to reclaim holy lands, driven by promises of salvation, wealth, or sheer survival. The First Crusade, launched in 1096, saw armies from across Europe march thousands of miles into unfamiliar terrain, facing starvation, disease, and brutal combat. By the time our knight vanished, the Crusader states were fragile kingdoms clinging to the edge of a hostile world, where alliances shifted like desert sands and trust was as scarce as fresh water. Political intrigue was everywhere. The Latin East was a chessboard where European nobles, Byzantine emperors, and Muslim leaders vied for power. A knight sworn to one lord might find himself caught in the crossfire of rival factions, his loyalty tested by whispers of betrayal or secret deals. Religious fervor collided with harsh reality. Soldiers who set out as pious warriors often became hardened mercenaries, their idealism worn away by years of bloodshed. And amid this chaos, record-keeping was haphazard at best. Chronicles were written by monks far from the front lines, their accounts colored by rumor, bias, or simple gaps in knowledge. A missing knight might merit only a single line in a dusty manuscript if he was mentioned at all. The journey alone could be deadly. Traveling from Europe to the Holy Land meant months at sea or trudging through hostile territories where bandits, storms, and disease picked off stragglers. Once there, supply chains were unreliable, communication with home nearly impossible, and the landscape itself, a patchwork of scorching deserts, rugged mountains, and fortified cities, could swallow a man without a trace. Battles were chaotic melees where armor made identification difficult, and the fallen were often buried in mass graves, their names lost to time. It was during the Third Crusade, a clash of titans like Richard the Lionheart and Saladin, that our knight's trail goes cold. The campaign was a whirlwind of sieges, skirmishes, and sudden reversals, perfect conditions for a disappearance. Perhaps he fell in the chaos of the Battle of Arsuf, where dust and blood obscured the field. Or maybe he vanished during the grueling march along the coast, where exhaustion and dehydration claimed as many lives as enemy arrows. The deeper we dig, the more questions arise, because in an era where even kings could disappear into captivity or anonymous graves, a single knight's fate might slip through the cracks of history. But that's where the real detective work begins. The last reliable account of our vanished knight comes from a fragment of a Templar sergeant's journal, preserved by sheer luck in a monastery's forgotten chest. According to the scribbled entry dated to the autumn of 1191, the knight was seen riding alone toward the hills east of Acre just before dusk, an unusual departure, as patrols never ventured out singly. The sergeant noted how the knight refused company, insisting he carried urgent word for a nearby garrison. But here's the twist: no such message was ever delivered, and the garrison's own records show no expectation of his arrival. Eyewitnesses added eerie details. A local shepherd claimed to have seen a lone figure dismounting near a ruined watchtower, his silhouette swallowed by the gathering dark. Another account from a Venetian merchant's letter mentions a knight matching his description boarding a ship bound for Cyprus, except the vessel's manifest listed no noble passengers that week. These contradictions aren't just gaps, they're fractures in the story, suggesting someone went to great lengths to obscure the truth. Was he fleeing? or being silenced, historians have picked apart these clues for generations. One theory suggests desertion, a knight disillusioned by the Crusades' brutality, seizing a chance to vanish into anonymity. Yet his armor, found polished and intact near that olive tree, undermines this. Deserters didn't abandon costly gear unless forced. Another angle points to capture by Saladin's forces, who often ransomed high-ranking knights. But no ransom demand surfaced, and Muslim chronicles of the period mention no such prisoner, the most tantalizing possibility that his disappearance was staged. Templar records hint at shadowy operations, knights sent on covert missions, their movements erased to protect secrets. Could he have been tasked with smuggling relics, negotiating with dissident factions, or even infiltrating enemy ranks? The timing fits. The Third Crusade was a tinderbox of spies and double deals. Today, archaeologists and historians are piecing together his trail with tools our medieval witnesses couldn't imagine. Ground-penetrating radar scans the hills near Acre for hidden structures, while spectral imaging reveals faded ink in that sergeant's journal, words scratched out centuries ago, now whispering their secrets anew. Each discovery peels back another layer, inching us closer to solving one of history's most haunting riddles. Modern historians and archaeologists have become the latest detectives in this centuries-old mystery, armed not with swords and shields but with technology and tenacity. Take Dr. Elena Voss, a medieval historian at Oxford, who spent 3 years combing through Templar financial records for any hint of our vanished knight. Her breakthrough came in an unlikely place, a faded ledger entry noting payment for a messenger's swift passage to Cyprus, just days after the disappearance. The amount was unusually high, suggesting urgency or secrecy, but the recipient's name was deliberately smudged. Using multispectral imaging, her team revealed traces of erased ink that might finally identify who arranged that voyage. Then there's Professor Yusuf Al-Masri, an archaeologist in Acre, who's mapping the landscape with drones and LiDAR technology to recreate the knight's last known route. His scans uncovered a network of forgotten footpaths leading east from the ruined watchtower, paths that don't appear on any medieval map. These weren't random trails, he explains. They were escape routes used by both Crusaders and locals during sieges. His theory, the knight might have known about these hidden corridors, using them to slip away unnoticed. But piecing together the past isn't just about technology. It's about reading between the lines of history. Handwriting analysis of that Templar sergeant's journal revealed something startling. The entry about the knight's departure was added later in a different ink, as if someone altered the record. Forensic linguist Dr. Claire Lefebvre notes the phrasing is unusually vague for a military log, with passive constructions that avoid naming responsibility. This wasn't just poor record-keeping, she says. It was deliberate obfuscation, yet every discovery brings ethical quandaries. When ground-penetrating radar detected anomalies near the olive tree where the armor was found, the team faced a dilemma: excavate and risk disturbing what could be a grave, or leave the secrets buried. Medieval burial customs complicate matters. Crusaders were often interred hastily in unmarked pits, making identification nearly impossible without invasive methods. And then there's the broader question: does exhuming this knight's story honor his memory or reduce him to a curiosity? Now, these scholars are stepping out of the archives and into the field, retracing the knight's last journey on foot. They follow the same coastal road he might have taken, feeling the same Mediterranean sun, the same crunch of gravel underfoot. It's a pilgrimage of sorts, blending historical rigor with something more intuitive, a chance to see the landscape through his eyes. As they hike toward those eastern hills, they're not just tracking a missing man, They're bridging 8 centuries in a single, determined stride. The past may be silent, but it's not yet finished speaking. To retrace the vanished knight's path is to walk a razor's edge between history and legend, where every mile could conceal a clue. His journey likely began in the rolling hills of France or the misty forests of Germany, where he would have joined a company of fellow crusaders, nobles, mercenaries, and zealots bound for the Holy Land. Picture the scene, a dusty road winding south toward the great ports of Marseille or Venice, lined with pilgrims' hostels and makeshift markets selling everything from forged relics to stale bread. Travel in the 12th century was no grand adventure. It was a gauntlet of exhaustion and peril. Bandits lurked in wooded passes, preying on the slow or the unlucky, while local lords demanded tolls for crossing their land. Disease festered in crowded inns, and a simple injury from a stumble could fester into a death sentence. The sea voyage was worse. Ships of the era were cramped, leaky coffins, where knights accustomed to horseback were packed below decks like salted fish. Storms could blow vessels hundreds of miles off course, and piracy was rampant, especially in the waters around Crete and Cyprus. One account from a merchant's diary describes crusaders so desperate from thirst they drank seawater, their tongues swelling until they choked. If our knight survived this gauntlet, his first sight of the Holy Land wouldn't have been the golden domes of Jerusalem, but the stark, sun-baked walls of Acre, the Crusaders' last stronghold on the coast. Modern travelers who have retraced this route speak of its eerie duality. A hiker following the old pilgrim trails through Turkey described finding Crusader graffiti carved into a cliffside, a crude cross, and the words Deus Vult, God wills it, weathered but still legible after 8 centuries. In Lebanon, a historian camping near the ruins of Beaufort Castle heard locals tell of a ghost in broken armor, seen pacing the battlements, a tale that mirrors medieval accounts of our vanished knight. These echoes blur time, reminding us that landscapes have long memories. The journey's greatest danger, though, wasn't nature or bandits, it was the politics simmering in every city along the way. Constantinople, the glittering Byzantine capital, was a nest of intrigue where crusaders were alternately welcomed as allies or viewed as barbarian pawns. Antioch's streets ran with blood after its siege, and even among fellow Christians, trust was scarce. A knight separated from his retinue in these places would have been vulnerable not just to violence but to whispers. Could he have been waylaid by a rival faction, drawn into a plot that required his disappearance? Art and literature offer tantalizing hints. A fresco in a Sicilian church depicts a knight kneeling before a shadowy figure, his surcoat bearing a crest similar to descriptions of our missing man. A troubadour's song from Provence tells of a knight who traded his sword for silence, though whether it's allegory or reportage is unclear. These fragments are like footprints in sand, faint, fading, but undeniably there. They suggest a story too dangerous to write plainly, one that had to be hidden in symbols and half-truths. What's striking is how little the route has changed. The same mountain passes still bottleneck travelers, the same coastal winds still batter ships. The dangers have just taken new forms: bandits replaced by border guards, scurvy by sunstroke. Yet the land remembers. In a monastery on Rhodes, a librarian recently discovered a scrap of vellum sewn into the binding of a ledger. It lists the names of knights who departed unseen, and among them, a single word rings out like a challenge: requiriter. He is sought. Even now, the hunt continues. Medieval art and literature hold cryptic breadcrumbs about our vanished knight, woven into tapestries and whispered in verse. A 12th century tapestry from Normandy, now faded but preserved in a Parisian museum, shows a lone knight kneeling before a bishop, his face deliberately unpainted, his shield bearing a faint emblem matching descriptions from Acre. Scholars debate whether this was a veiled reference to our missing man or mere coincidence, but the symbolism is striking. The bishop's hand hovers over the knight's head, not in blessing, but as if halting an unseen blow. Was this a nod to divine intervention, or a threat? Epic poems of the era take even greater liberties. In the Song of the Lost Paladin, a popular troubadour's tale, the knight becomes a tragic figure who walked into the moon's shadow after discovering a secret that would burn the holy city. The poem's patron, a wealthy Burgundian duke with ties to the Templars, who may have commissioned it to obscure real events. Manuscripts of the work contain bizarre marginalia, sketches of labyrinths and repeated Latin phrases like custos veritatis, guardian of the truth, suggesting scribes knew more than they dared write plainly. Religious art adds another layer. A fresco in a Tuscan monastery depicts a knight surrendering his sword to a hooded figure amid ruins that resemble Acre's coastline. Radiocarbon dating places the painting within a decade of the disappearance, but the knight's identity was scrubbed away literally. Microscopic analysis reveals paint flecks where a crest once was, scraped off centuries ago. Who ordered that erasure, and why patronage shaped these narratives as much as fact? A knight's story might be glorified if his family funded the artwork, or vilified if his enemies held the purse strings. Take the Chronica Regum Hierosolymitanorum, a chronicle commissioned by a rival noble family. It dismisses our knight as a coward who fled at dusk. Yet the original manuscript shows evidence of tampering, entire paragraphs inked over, their original text still detectable under ultraviolet light. The most tantalizing clue lies in a Bohemian psalter's hidden margin. Beneath layers of vellum, spectral imaging revealed a tiny map of the Levant with a route marked in silver point, a path leading from Acre to a mountain cave. Near it, a single word, absconditus, hidden. Whether this refers to the knight, a treasure, or something else entirely remains a mystery. But one thing is clear, medieval artists and writers weren't just recording history. They were threading secrets into their work, trusting future generations to unravel them. In a dimly lit archive in Toledo, Spain, a crumbling manuscript recently surfaced, a letter sealed with a wax emblem bearing the mark of the Templar order. Dated to the winter of 1192, just months after our knight's disappearance, its contents are a labyrinth of coded phrases and half-finished thoughts. The handwriting is hurried, as if scribbled in haste, with ink blots obscuring keywords. One line stands out starkly: "The price of silence is paid in shadow." But who wrote it, and why was it hidden for centuries beneath a stack of land deeds in a monastery's cellar? Deciphering medieval script is like untangling a spider's web. The letter's author used Carolingian minuscule, a common style but riddled with personal flourishes. Dr. Isabelle Dumont, a paleographer at the Sorbonne, notes the uneven spacing suggests the writer was either ill or under duress. Letters slant abruptly here, she points out, as if the quill was snatched mid-word. More puzzling are the deliberate gaps, whole lines left blank, as if someone later excised compromising details. Infrared scans revealed ghostly traces beneath the parchment, a sketched map of Acre's eastern gates, now faint as a breath on glass. The letter's phrasing fuels debate. Medieval Latin was rigidly formal, yet this text veers into cryptic poetry. "The falcon flies where no arrow follows" could reference a covert escape or a metaphor for divine judgment. Some scholars argue it's a confession, citing the line, "I have broken what cannot be mended." Others see a warning, noting the repeated symbol of a crossed-out crown, possibly hinting at treason against Richard the Lionheart. The most controversial theory, that the letter isn't from the knight at all, but about him, a Templar superior documenting a disciplinary act too sensitive for official records. Science offers new clues. Microscopic analysis detected iron gall ink mixed with oak gall, a costly blend used only by high-ranking clerics or nobles. Pollen grains embedded in the parchment trace back to Cyprus, where Templars maintained a secretive commandery. Then there's the wax seal. Spectral imaging shows it was reused, pressed over an older imprint. Someone went to great lengths to mask this letter's origins. Now, attention shifts to artifacts tied to the knight, his recovered armor, a rusted dagger found near the olive tree, even soil samples from the site. X-rays reveal the dagger's blade was snapped deliberately, a ritual act in medieval disgraces, but the armor tells a different story. Its interior padding bears traces of lavender and myrrh, substances used to soothe wounds. Was he injured that final night? Every object whispers contradictions, daring us to listen closer. The letter's greatest revelation might be its very existence. In an age where parchment was precious, why preserve such an enigmatic text unless it held unbearable weight? Perhaps the answer lies not in the words themselves, but in the fear that compelled someone to hide them, then and now. The armor found near that lone olive tree wasn't just rusted metal, it was a time capsule waiting to be cracked open. Forensic archaeologists examining the breastplate noticed something peculiar. The left shoulder guard bore a deep, clean gouge, not from battle, but from deliberate scraping. Under magnification, the marks revealed a pattern, a systematic erasure, as if someone had tried to remove a crest or insignia. But why? Knights wore their heraldry with pride. Defacing it was tantamount to erasing their identity. Metallurgists traced the steel's origin to a now-vanished forge in Lorraine, France. Its unique alloy matching swords commissioned for a specific Crusader contingent in 1189. That tiny detail narrows the search from hundreds of missing knights to a handful of candidates. Then there's the dagger. Its snapped blade wasn't just broken, it was ritualistically killed, bent backward in a way medieval warriors reserved for surrendering to a superior. But the real surprise came from residue analysis. Traces of myrrh and frankincense clung to the hilt, substances used not in combat but in sacred oaths. Was this blade part of a sworn pact gone wrong, or evidence of a last desperate plea for sanctuary? Bones discovered nearby add another layer. Though too fragmented to belong definitively to our knight, isotopic testing revealed the diet of the deceased, a mix of Mediterranean grains and Northern European meats, consistent with Crusaders who'd spent years in the Levant. One femur showed signs of healed battle trauma, a sword wound matching tactics used by Saladin's cavalry. But here's where science hits its limits. Without intact DNA or dental records, confirming identity is like assembling a puzzle with half the pieces missing. Local folklore rushes in where archaeology falters. In a village near Acre, elders still tell of a silent knight who wandered into the hills with a secret too heavy to bear. A 12th century Syrian chronicle mentions a Frankish warrior who sought refuge with a Sufi mystic, trading his sword for the weight of truth. These stories, dismissed as myth for centuries, now take on new urgency. Could oral traditions have preserved whispers of the knight's fate all along? The debate among experts is fierce. Traditionalists argue folklore corrupts facts, while ethnohistorians counter that stories are living archives shaped by collective memory. A compromise emerges. Perhaps the knight's disappearance wasn't a single event, but a slow fading first from records, then from sight, until all that remained was a name on the wind. The relics don't just speak of one man's end. They whisper of an entire world where honor, faith, and survival collided in ways we're only beginning to understand. Long after parchment crumbles and ink fades, voices carry history forward, especially when the story is too dangerous to write down. In remote villages from the Pyrenees to the Lebanese coast, elders still recount versions of our vanished knight's tale. each iteration tinted by local color yet preserving eerie common threads. A shepherd in the Languedoc region describes a man in moonlit armor who begged for bread at midnight, whispering about a key that locks the sky. Meanwhile, near Tyre, fishermen speak of a Frankish warrior who traded his sword for a fisherman's cloak, boarding a boat to where the sea meets fire. These aren't just folktales, they're fractured echoes of something real, passed mouth to ear like contraband. What makes oral tradition so vital is its stubbornness. While medieval chronicles were penned by the powerful monks, nobles, victors, villagers preserved the uncomfortable truths those records excluded. Take the Occitan ballad Lo Cavalier Escondat, the hidden knight, sung at harvest festivals for generations. It describes a knight who saw the cross broken and fled not from cowardice but to carry its pieces to safety. This directly contradicts official Templar accounts labeling him a deserter. Even more striking, the ballad's refrain mentions the Red Spring, a phrase later found scratched onto a stone near Acre's eastern gate, proof that whispers sometimes outlast monuments. But folklore isn't a perfect mirror. In the alpine village of St. Veyron, the knight morphs into a spectral figure who haunts crossroads, demanding travelers answer a riddle about the price of silence. This supernatural twist likely reflects medieval anxieties about unresolved oaths. Conversely, a Druze community in Syria venerates him as al-Malik al-Khafi, the hidden king, blending his story with pre-Islamic hero myths. Such adaptations reveal less about the knight than about the communities reshaping his legend to fit their worldview. The most tantalizing oral accounts hint at heresy. A Cathar family chronicle from Montelu, smuggled out before the Inquisition razed their village, mentions a knight of the inner circle who knew the secret of the two grails. This aligns with fringe theories that our vanished man stumbled upon Gnostic or dualist beliefs, heresies that threatened the Church's authority. Perhaps his disappearance wasn't physical but ideological, a quiet defection to underground movements flourishing in the Crusades' shadow. Now the puzzle takes a darker turn. In the archives of Carcassonne, a witch trial deposition from 1324 describes a woman accused of consorting with the ghost of a Latin knight. Under torture, she confessed the spectre taught her a prayer that unmakes kings. Was this delirium or a garbled memory of subversive teachings? The line between heresy and history blurs where oral traditions flicker, but their heat still warms the trail we follow today. One thing is certain, these stories weren't told lightly. In an age when wrong beliefs could mean fire or the rack, preserving such tales required cunning. Some were encoded in weaving patterns or hidden in children's counting rhymes. Others traveled with migrant workers or stonemasons, their details shifting like the shadows in which they were whispered. To piece them together now is to eavesdrop on 8 centuries of defiance, and to wonder what other truths still linger, unbroken, in the spaces between official history's lines. The Knights Templar loom over this mystery like shadows cast by a guttering torch, simultaneously vivid and elusive. Founded in 1118 to protect pilgrims, the order evolved into a powerhouse of faith, finance, and military might, only to be dismantled in a blaze of heresy accusations 2 centuries later. Their abrupt fall left behind a vacuum of secrets, fertile ground for theories linking our vanished knight to their clandestine networks. But how much is history and how much is romantic speculation? Start with the facts. Templar records from Acre mention a knight matching our man's description attached to their contingent during the Third Crusade, not as a full brother, but as a confrater, a lay associate who fought alongside them without taking monastic vows. This detail is crucial. It meant he moved between worlds, privy to Templar strategies but not bound by their strict discipline. A payroll ledger from 1191 lists payments to such associates for special services, a phrase some historians argue meant espionage or relic retrieval. Could he have been sent on a mission so sensitive that even the Templars erased his trail? Then there's the armor's defaced insignia. While Templar knights proudly bore the Red Cross, associates often wore personal crests. Forensic heraldists studying the scraped shoulder guard identified residual traces of a boar motif, a symbol tied to the Anjou family, fierce Templar allies. This fuels theories that the knight served as a go-between for the order and secular lords, a role that might have placed him in the crosshairs of political schemes. But Templar connections also invite wild conjecture. Popular lore paints the order as guardians of the Holy Grail or architects of vast conspiracies, claims most scholars dismiss. Dr. Thomas Beaufort, a medieval historian at Cambridge, cautions, the Templars were bureaucrats as much as warriors. Their real power lay in ledgers, not arcane relics. Yet their mystique persists because their archives burned with them. The absence of records became a canvas for imagination, where even a missing knight could be recast as a guardian of lost secrets. Perhaps the most plausible link lies in the Templars' financial web. The order functioned as medieval bankers, moving vast sums across borders. A knight with their trust might have transported gold or sensitive documents, a target for thieves or rivals. Intriguingly, a letter from a Genos merchant mentions an unmarked shipment, leaving Acre under armed escort days after the disappearance. The cargo. Never specified, separating fact from fiction requires scrutinizing the knight's own choices. If he was a Templar affiliate, his loyalty would have been fractured, torn between feudal oaths to his liege lord and the order's higher calling. The Crusades were rife with such dual allegiances, often ending in betrayal. A scrap of poetry attributed to a fellow knight laments, "No man serves two masters when the desert wind howls." The truth may be simpler than conspiracy. Templar associates were often expendable, their deaths or disappearances scarcely noted in an order preoccupied with survival. What if our knight was just another casualty of chaos, his story inflated by time and the Templars' own legend? Or perhaps his fate was tied to their darkest hour, the moment when faith and pragmatism collided, and silence became the only safe currency. Either way, his vanishing reflects a broader truth. In the Crusades, even the mightiest institutions couldn't protect their own from the tides of war and whispers. To understand why a knight might vanish without a trace, we must first step into the tangled web of loyalties that defined his world. Faith, fealty, and fear weren't abstract ideals, they were forces that could pull a man in three directions at once. Imagine swearing an oath to God on the same blade you'd pledged to your liege lord, only to watch both promises crumble in the blood-soaked mud of the Holy Land. The Crusades were a crucible where devotion was tested daily, and not every soul emerged unbroken. Disillusionment was a slow poison. Chroniclers like Joinville wrote of knights who arrived as fervent warriors, only to become hollow-eyed skeptics after years of witnessing corruption, commanders who pocketed tithes meant for supplies, priests who blessed massacres, and nobles who waged private wars under the banner of the cross. A knight might endure hunger and battle, but the erosion of purpose that could unravel even the stoutest heart. Consider the case of Robert of Sablé, a Templar who abandoned his post in Antioch, leaving behind a note that simply read, "I cannot serve where God has turned his face." Was our vanished knight similarly shattered by the gap between crusading ideals and grim reality? Then there's the weight of fealty. Medieval honor wasn't just personal, it bound families, generations, and entire regions. To desert was to damn one's lineage, yet records show some knights chose exile over obedience. take Fulk of Newley, who vanished after refusing orders to execute prisoners at Acre. His family's coat of arms was publicly defaced in punishment, a warning etched in paint and shame. But here's the twist. Years later, a merchant's ledger from Alexandria mentions a Frankish swordsmith matching Fulk's description, living under a new name. Had our knight likewise traded his identity for survival, fear could be the sharpest blade of all. The Templars weren't just warriors, they were enforcers of discipline. A knight who witnessed something forbidden, perhaps the theft of sacred relics or a commander's treason, might flee rather than face the order's justice. The fate of Gerard de Rydefort, a Templar master who fell out of favor, is telling. Chronicles claim he died in battle, but a Genos spy's report suggests he was strangled by his own sergeants. If such rumors reached our knight's ears, would the desert have seemed safer than his comrades? The psychological toll of crusading left scars no armor could shield. Nightmares plagued even the victorious. King Richard the Lionheart himself awoke screaming, haunted by the arrows at Jaffa. Medical texts of the era describe Jerusalem sickness, a malaise of the spirit marked by waking visions and a compulsion to walk barefoot toward the sea. Could our knight have been gripped by such despair, or did he, like the legendary Walder of Aquitaine, simply lay down his sword one evening and stride into the darkness, leaving only footprints that the wind soon stole? What's certain is this: vanishing wasn't an act of cowardice, but a choice etched in the quiet terror of a man who'd seen too much. In a world where honor was both shield and shackles, sometimes the bravest thing a knight could do was disappear. The battlefield of the Crusades wasn't just a place of clashing steel. It was a forge that reshaped minds as brutally as it did bodies. Modern historians often overlook the psychological toll of these holy wars, but the echoes are there, buried in the margins of chronicles and the cracks of personal accounts. Imagine standing in the Levant's scorching sun, surrounded by the stench of death, your faith tested not by infidels, but by the sheer weight of what you've been ordered to do. For every knight who returned home triumphant, there were those who carried back invisible wounds, their spirits fractured by the horrors they'd witnessed. Medieval minds had no concept of post-traumatic stress, yet they recognized its shadow. Chroniclers wrote of men who woke screaming from dreams of battle, or who wandered camp at night, as if seeking a foe only they could see. Some knights were said to suffer from melancholia, a catch-all term for a despair so deep it paralyzed the soul. Others exhibited what physicians called the wandering sickness, a restlessness that drove them to abandon their posts and roam aimlessly, as if fleeing memories too vivid to outpace. Could our vanished knight have been one of these broken men, his disappearance not an act of cowardice, but the last gasp of a mind pushed beyond endurance? The parallels to modern veterans are haunting. Like today's soldiers, Crusaders faced the dissonance of returning to a world that couldn't comprehend what they'd endured. A knight who'd survived the massacre at Jerusalem might sit silent at feasts, flinching at the clatter of plate sounds too close to the din of siege engines. Letters from the era hint at this alienation. One Templar's missive to his family reads, "Do not ask me of the East, for there are no words fit for your ears." Another confesses, "I have forgotten the face of peace." Religion, the very force that sent these men to war, often became both crutch and curse. Some clung to ritual, praying compulsively to atone for killings they'd been told were righteous. Others spiraled into doubt, their faith shattered by the hypocrisy of leaders who preached mercy while burning villages. Mystical visions were common exhaustion, and guilt breeding hallucinations of angels or demons. A priest's diary from Acre describes a knight who swore he saw the crucified Christ weeping on the battlefield, demanding, "Why have you done this in my name?" Perhaps this is the key to understanding our vanished knight. If he'd reached his breaking point, the desert might have seemed not an escape but a pilgrimage, a place to confront the God who'd allowed such suffering, or to lose himself where no one would follow. The Crusades weren't just fought with swords, they were waged in the silence of 1,000 tormented hearts, each grappling with the cost of holy war. And sometimes the bravest thing a wounded soul could do was walk away from the battle entirely. In the swirling dust of the Holy Land, where every shadow could be a sign from heaven or a trick of the light, the Knight's disappearance became a mirror reflecting medieval Europe's deepest fears and hopes. To his contemporaries, vanishing without a trace wasn't just mysterious, it was theological. Some saw the hand of God in his absence, pointing to accounts like that of the chronicler William of Tyre, who wrote of crusaders lifted bodily into the sky as divine reward. Others whispered of punishment, citing the fate of a German knight who, according to legend, was swallowed by the earth after stealing from a mosque, a cautionary tale of sacred wrath. The line between miracle and curse was thin, and our knight's story straddled it precariously. Religious fervor colored every interpretation. A monk's marginalia in a psalter from Cluny Abbey depicts a knight kneeling before a radiant figure, labeled Angelus Occultans, the hiding angel. Was this celestial rescue or exile? Contrast this with a Venetian merchant's letter describing a cursed Frank, doomed to wander until Judgment Day for breaking his pilgrimage vow. Both narratives reveal the same truth. In an age where plague, famine, and war were seen as divine messages, unexplained absence demanded supernatural explanation. Even the knight's recovered armor fed speculation, the lack of battle damage prompting theories he'd been unmade by heavenly fire, like the biblical Sodom. Yet not all vanishings were equal. The Church celebrated disappearances that served its narrative, like the legend of the 9 worthies heroes supposedly taken alive into paradise. Meanwhile, those like our knight, whose fate lacked clear moral, became Rorschach tests for medieval anxiety. A sermon from Archbishop Baldric of Dol warns of knights, vanished into God's silence as testaments to divine inscrutability. This ambiguity made the knight story malleable, claimed by mystics as proof of celestial intervention, used by reformers as evidence of crusading's spiritual cost. Modern perspectives strip away the supernatural but uncover deeper tensions. Archaeologist Dr. Fatima Al-Mansur notes how medieval people mapped faith onto geography. Holy sites weren't just places but conduits to the divine, where miracles felt tangible. In such a world, disappearance could signify transcendence. Today's historians, armed with carbon dating and ground-penetrating radar, seek earthly explanations, yet the human impulse to wonder remains. What changes isn't our curiosity, but our tools for satisfying it. The Knight story also exposes the economic engine beneath Crusading's spiritual veneer. For every visionary like Bernard of Clairvaux preaching holy war, there were bankers like the Bardi family financing knights' journeys with loans secured against future plunder. A knight's disappearance wasn't just a spiritual crisis, it was a financial one. Unpaid debts could ruin families, as seen in the case of Otto of Brunswick, whose vanishing left his heirs indentured for generations. The Crusades, at their core, were as much about trade routes and silver as salvation. Pilgrims carried coins, not just crosses. Armies needed grain, not just grace. Perhaps the greatest miracle was how seamlessly medieval society dressed its ledger books in celestial gold. The gleaming armor and noble vows of a crusader masked a far grittier truth. Holy war was staggeringly expensive. For every knight who rode east for salvation, there were ledgers tallying the cost down to the last silver penny. A single suit of chainmail could equal a year's income for a minor lord, while transporting horses by ship from Marseille to Acre cost more than most peasants earned in a lifetime. This wasn't just a spiritual journey, It was a financial gambit where bankruptcy loomed as large as Saracen arrows. Consider the math. Historical records from Burgundy detail a knight's typical crusading expenses: 50 livres for armor, 30 for weapons, another 20 for a packhorse, and nearly 200 for the voyage itself, equivalent to buying a small vineyard. Many mortgaged ancestral lands to the church or wealthy burghers, trading tomorrow's security for today's holy quest. The Templars emerged as medieval bankers in this vacuum, offering loans with collateral like a pledge of future plunder or even siblings left as hostages. One contract from 1187 chillingly stipulates, if the borrower dies en route, his eldest son shall assume the debt, yet the risks were laced with tantalizing rewards. The sack of Constantinople in 1204 proved crusading could make men rich overnight. Venetian merchants hauled back silks, relics, and gold by the ton. Lesser knights might pocket a fortune in ransoms. Arabic chronicles recount Frankish warriors bartering captured emirs for chests of dinars. But our vanished knight's social standing placed him in a precarious middle ground. Too noble to march as a common mercenary, yet likely too minor to command lucrative fiefs in the Levant. For men like him, the Crusades offered status by association, fighting alongside kings, even as their purses emptied. The economic divide between noble and common crusaders was stark. While lords traveled with retinues and treasure chests, foot soldiers often signed indentures, agreeing to serve in exchange for passage and a share of loot. A grim account from a Genoese ship's log lists 23 poor brothers who perished from starvation chained below decks, their contracts voided by death. Meanwhile, noble knights like our subject carried letters of credit, their debts deferred by political connections. But privilege came with strings. Failing to repay could mean disgrace or worse, the confiscation of family lands by creditors like the ruthless Lombard moneylenders. Behind these personal struggles lay a vast geopolitical machine. The Crusades were funded by a shadow economy of Italian bankers, Templar treasurers, and Byzantine gold. Acres markets buzzed with currencies from a dozen realms, while Venetian galleys smuggled arms under cargoes of spice. Some historians argue the holy wars were as much about controlling trade routes as saving souls, the Silk Road's wealth flowing through Crusader ports. Perhaps our knight glimpsed this hypocrisy, realizing too late that salvation had a price tag. Or maybe he found another way to pay, vanishing into the desert, leaving his debts and vows buried in the sand. The true cost of crusading wasn't measured in coins alone, but in the broken lives strewn across its ledgers. For every knight who returned wealthy, 100 languished in debtors' prisons or faded into obscurity. Their stories whisper a cautionary tale. Even the holiest war was built on gold, and gold, unlike faith, always demanded repayment. The Holy Land during the Crusades was less a chessboard and more a nest of vipers, where today's ally could become tomorrow's executioner with the flick of a treaty. Take the infamous betrayal at Antioch in 1098, when Crusader princes swore oaths of brotherhood to their Byzantine allies, only to seize the city for themselves weeks later. Such treachery wasn't the exception, it was the grim rule of survival. For a knight like ours, navigating this landscape meant walking a razor's edge between honor and pragmatism. One misstep, a misplaced trust in a Templar envoy, a whispered conversation overheard by the wrong emir, could vanish a man as swiftly as any battlefield arrow. The Kingdom of Jerusalem's court was a cauldron of intrigue. Queen Sibylla's faction clashed with her own nobles, while the Ibelin family forged secret pacts with Egyptian viziers behind their rivals' backs. Even Saladin, the legendary Muslim leader, played both conqueror and diplomat, offering safe passage to Frankish knights who switched sides, then executing them if their intelligence proved stale. A letter from the Geniza archives in Cairo reveals how one Crusader baron, Reynold of Sidon, secretly negotiated with Saladin while publicly rallying troops against him. Reynold survived. Lesser men who attempted similar double games were found floating in the Jordan. Byzantine involvement added another layer of deception. Emperor Alexios Roman III once promised Crusaders gold and troops, then withdrew his support mid-campaign, leaving them stranded. Knights who'd pledged loyalty to Constantinople often found themselves abandoned, or worse, sold out to Turkish warlords. A fragmentary scroll from a Cypriot monastery recounts how a Frankish knight named Everard was lured into a trap by Byzantine mercenaries, his armor stripped and repurposed before his body was tossed into a lime pit. Could our vanished knight have met a similar fate, caught between the shifting allegiances of Christian factions? The Templars weren't immune to these games. Internal documents from their Cyprus chapter hint at a schism in 1192, hardliners accusing moderates of consorting with the enemy after secret talks with Kurdish generals. Punishment was swift and silent. 3 knights reportedly left for the desert on penance, their names struck from rolls. The timing aligns suspiciously with our knight's disappearance. Was he sent to negotiate with Saladin's lieutenants, only to be disavowed when the mission soured? Or did he uncover a conspiracy too explosive to let him live? Archaeology offers chilling clues. Near the ruins of Montfort Castle, a mass grave held skeletons with Frankish-style fractures, blunt force trauma to the back of the skull, the hallmark of execution rather than battle. One corpse wore a signet ring bearing a boar crest, its band deliberately twisted to obscure the insignia. Soil analysis placed the burial in the late 12th century, and the positioning bodies stacked like firewood suggested a hurried cover-up. Nearby, a rusted dagger bore notches matching those on our knight's recovered blade. Coincidence or evidence of a purge the chronicles never dared record. Now the search narrows to a windswept ridge where the borders of Crusader, Byzantine, and Ayyubid territories once blurred. Ground scans reveal subterranean chambers, their entrances collapsed, perhaps to hide something or someone. The local Bedouin tell of a cave where the Silent Ones were taken, its location lost after an earthquake in 1307. Satellite imagery shows unnatural rock formations along the ridge, hinting at human intervention. If the knight's final moments were spent in such a place, his story wouldn't be one of desertion or divine wrath, but of politics' oldest lesson. In the Holy Land, loyalty was the first casualty, and the truth often lay buried with the dead. The hunt for the vanished knight's final resting place has become a modern quest, blending cutting-edge technology with age-old intuition. In a sun-baked valley near Acre, archaeologists kneel over ground-penetrating radar screens, their devices pulsing waves into the earth like echoes calling across centuries. Last summer, a team led by Dr. Miriam Cohen discovered an anomaly beneath a cluster of olive trees, a rectangular depression lined with stones, too precise to be natural. The shape matches known Crusader burial practices, but what's inside remains a mystery. Soil samples revealed traces of iron oxide and organic decay, suggesting metal and perhaps bones, yet the site remains untouched, its secrets preserved by a delicate ethical balance. Medieval graves were rarely the grand, torch-lit crypts of Hollywood fantasy. Most Crusaders buried their dead hastily, often in mass pits or shallow trenches marked only by a sword thrust into the earth. A knight of middling rank might rate a solitary grave, but even then, it was typically an unadorned affair, a shroud, perhaps a personal relic, and the cold comfort of a Latin prayer. Contrast this with the elaborate tomb effigies of Europe's cathedrals, where stone knights lie eternally pristine, hands folded over their swords. Those monuments were propaganda, crafted to inspire the living, the reality in the Holy Land was far grimmer. When the knight's armor was found neatly arranged near that lone olive tree, it hinted at a burial stripped of pomp, a farewell made in haste or secrecy. The debate over disturbing such sights grows fiercer with each passing season. Some scholars argue that exhuming the grave could answer historical questions. Was the knight wounded? Were there signs of violence or ritual? Genetic testing might even trace his lineage back to modern descendants. But others, like Dr. Rajiv Hassan, a specialist in medieval Islamic archaeology, counter that these remains are not specimens but human beings who deserve dignity. Every time we lift a skeleton from the earth, he notes, we risk turning a person into a data point. Local communities add another layer. In a region where Crusader legacy is still fraught, excavations can stir old tensions. A compromise has emerged, non-invasive techniques like LiDAR and soil analysis that glean clues without lifting a single bone. Meanwhile, the knight's legend has escaped the confines of academia, seeping into novels, films, and even video games. A recent best-selling novel reimagines him as a tragic antihero who forsakes the Crusades to protect a Muslim village, while a popular RPG casts him as a spectral guide leading players to hidden relics. These adaptations, though fanciful, speak to something deeper, our need to fill history's silences with meaning. Whether saint or deserter, the vanished knight endures because he embodies the ultimate mystery, the human capacity to disappear, yet never truly be gone. As the sun sets over Acre's ruins, the olive trees cast long shadows where the radar's pulses still hum. Perhaps the grave will never be opened, leaving the knight's fate to the realm of whispers and wonder. Or perhaps one day the earth will yield its secret not with a fanfare, but with the quiet clarity of bones and rusted steel, telling a story 8 centuries in the making. Either way, his legacy is assured, not as a conqueror or a king, but as a man who stepped out of history's light, leaving behind a riddle that still tugs at our imagination. The vanished knight story didn't fade into history, it slipped into our collective imagination, morphing with each retelling to suit the fears and fantasies of the age. From dusty chronicles to blockbuster films, his tale has been reshaped, romanticized, and sometimes outright reinvented. Take the 1954 Hollywood epic The Crusader's Oath, where our knight becomes a dashing hero who abandons the Crusades to rescue a Saracen princess. It's thrilling cinema, but the truth, medieval knights didn't ride off into sunsets with forbidden loves. They died of dysentery in besieged camps or vanished without a whisper. Yet these adaptations reveal something profound. We don't just want history, we want a mirror for our own struggles. Literature has been kinder to the knight's legacy, though no less creative. In Umberto Eco's Bordolino, he's reimagined as a disillusioned soldier stumbling upon a hidden Gnostic sect, a nod to the era's underground heresies. Meanwhile, historical novelist Sharon K. Penman casts him as a Templar whistleblower in the land beyond the sea, hunted for knowing too much about the Order's financial crimes. Both versions, though fictional, tap into real tensions of the Crusades, the clash between faith and corruption, the weight of unspeakable truths. What these stories get right is the knight's humanity, his doubts, his compromises, rather than reducing him to a symbol. Video games take even greater liberties, but their interactive nature lets players become the vanished knight. In Assassin's Creed, Altair's Chronicles, he's a shadowy figure who leaves coded messages for the protagonist, a clever nod to the historical mystery. The RPG Kingdom Come, Deliverance goes further, embedding his fate in a side quest where players must choose whether to honor his memory or loot his grave. These adaptations may play fast with facts, but they capture something textbooks can't: the visceral uncertainty of living in that world, where every choice could lead to glory or oblivion. Why does this medieval mystery still captivate us? Perhaps because his vanishing acts as a blank canvas. In an age of surveillance and digital footprints, the idea of disappearing completely feels like the last true freedom or the ultimate terror. Modern retellings also reflect our unease with war's futility. The Knights' fractured loyalty resonates in an era of whistleblowers and moral ambiguity, where duty and conscience often collide. But for all the creative spins, glaring inaccuracies persist. Most films ignore the Crusades' multicultural reality, erasing the alliances and friendships that crossed religious lines. Few mention the knight's likely financial ruin, reducing his motives to love or faith when survival was just as compelling. And almost none grapple with the psychological toll, the nightmares, the guilt that would have haunted him long before he vanished. The knight's greatest gift to modern storytellers isn't his name or his deeds, but his silence. In those gaps, we see our own fears of being forgotten, of failing our ideals, of secrets too heavy to bear. As the credits roll or the last page turns, one question lingers, as persistent as the desert wind. Would we have vanished too? Even after centuries of research, the vanished knight story remains riddled with gaps, silences that refuse to be filled, contradictions that resist resolution. One of the most glaring mysteries, the reliability of the very sources that first mentioned him. Take the Templar sergeant's journal entry. Was it a factual record or a carefully planted piece of disinformation? The ink analysis suggests tampering, but by whom? A superior officer covering up an embarrassing desertion, a rival faction fabricating evidence. Without the original manuscript's missing pages, we're left deciphering shadows. Then there's the timeline itself, full of holes wide enough to march an army through. The knight was last seen riding east of Acre in 1191, but no account explains what happened in the hours between his departure and the discovery of his armor. Was it minutes? Days? Even the location defies logic. Why stack armor neatly beside a tree unless it was a signal, a decoy, or part of some ritual we no longer understand? And why does the Venetian merchant's letter place him boarding a ship the same night, when maritime records show no vessel departed until dawn? These inconsistencies aren't just frustrating, they're tantalizing, proof that someone, 800 years ago, went to great lengths to muddy the trail. The biggest question of all, motive. If he deserted, why leave behind costly armor that could have funded a new life? If he was killed, where's the body? If he staged his disappearance, what secret was worth abandoning his name, his honor, his very identity? Each theory unravels under scrutiny. The heresy angle falters without evidence of his religious leanings. The spy narrative relies on Templar records too fragmentary to confirm. Even the psychological explanation that the horrors of war broke him doesn't square with the meticulous way his gear was arranged, suggesting a deliberate act, not a mind in chaos. What keeps historians hooked is how these gaps reflect the Crusades themselves, an era where truth was often the first casualty. Chronicles were written by victors or by monks far from the battlefield. Artifacts were looted, repurposed, or melted down. The knight's vanishing isn't an outlier, it's a microcosm of how slippery history can be. In an age without photographs or fingerprints, a man could dissolve into myth as easily as morning fog. Yet these ambiguities are also what make his story endure. They invite us to become detectives, weighing each scrap of evidence. Was the defaced boar crest on his armor a mark of shame or a coded message? Could the Red Spring mentioned in folk ballads refer to a meeting place, a bloodstain, or something more esoteric? Every generation brings new tools to the puzzle: LiDAR scans, DNA analysis, even AI-powered handwriting recognition, but the core mystery remains stubborn as bedrock. This isn't just about one man's fate, it's about how history is made and unmade. The Knights' disappearance forces us to confront how much we'll never know, the conversations lost to time, the decisions made in desperation, the quiet moments that change everything but leave no trace. His story whispers a humbling truth that the past isn't a puzzle to be solved, but a conversation without end, and perhaps that's why, after all these years, we're still listening. The Vanished Knight isn't just a relic of the past, he's a mirror held up to our own world, reflecting timeless struggles with identity, loyalty, and the stories we choose to remember. Think about it, in an age where social media immortalizes every moment, his disappearance feels almost radical. How many of us have dreamed of shedding our digital footprints, of stepping off the grid completely? His choice or fate to vanish speaks to a modern anxiety about being trapped by the identities we create, whether in the Middle Ages or the metaverse. But the parallels run deeper than personal freedom. The Crusades were a collision of cultures, a clash spun from the same threads of religion, power, and territory that fuel conflicts today. Replace the holy cities of Jerusalem and Acre with modern flashpoints, swap chainmail for hashtags, and the patterns emerge unchanged. The Knights era saw Crusaders and Saracens fighting one day, trading the next, much like rival nations today, where economic partnerships thrive alongside proxy wars. His vanishing reminds us that history isn't a straight line but a spiral, where old tensions resurface in new disguises. Consider how we memorialize the past. The Knight's story was nearly erased, surviving only in fragments and folktales until now. That selective memory isn't medieval, it's human. Today, statues topple, textbooks get revised, and social media algorithms amplify some voices while burying others. Who decides which stories endure? The Templars had their chronicles, we have Wikipedia and TikTok. The tools change, but the power to shape narratives remains contested ground. What's thrilling is that this mystery isn't locked away in academia. Modern technology has democratized history. Ground-penetrating radar kits can be rented by amateurs. AI deciphers faded manuscripts faster than any monk. Online forums crowdsource translations of Crusader documents, while satellite imagery reveals lost trade routes from your laptop. The Knight's case is no longer just for scholars, it's for anyone with curiosity and an internet connection. Perhaps that's his greatest legacy, proof that history isn't settled but alive. Every generation asks new questions of the past, and sometimes the past whispers back. Whether he was a heretic, a hero, or simply a man who walked away, his story challenges us to look beyond the official record, to listen for the gaps, the contradictions, the truths that linger in the silence. And who knows, the next clue might come from an amateur historian scanning old maps in their basement, proving that some mysteries refuse to stay buried. You don't need a degree or a time machine to help solve the mystery of the Vanished Knight, just curiosity and an internet connection. The digital age has flung open the doors of medieval archives, putting centuries-old documents at your fingertips. Start with the Bibliothèque Nationale de France's digitized manuscripts, where you can scour Templar financial records in high resolution, or dive into the Crusades Encyclopedia project, a crowd-sourced hub where volunteers transcribe and translate forgotten chronicles. Even amateur sleuths have made breakthroughs, like the hobbyist who cross-referenced Venetian shipping logs with weather records to debunk a long-held theory about the Knight's supposed voyage to Cyprus. Every pair of fresh eyes matters. You might spot a faded marginal note or a smudged name that scholars overlooked. For hands-on exploration, join one of the growing citizen archaeology initiatives. Projects like Puzzle of the Past use satellite imagery to identify potential excavation sites near Acre, while Open LiDAR lets volunteers analyze scans of Crusader fortifications from home. If you're lucky enough to travel, walk the Knight's last known path yourself. Local historians in Acre offer guided hikes to the ruins of Montfort Castle, where you can see the landscape through his eyes, the same olive groves, the same relentless sun. Just bring sturdy shoes and a keen eye. Artifacts still surface after heavy rains, from broken arrowheads to fragments of pottery that might once have held a dying man's last drink. Online forums are where theories collide and collaborations spark. The Medieval Mysteries Collective on Discord is a hive of activity, where linguists debate cryptic Latin phrases and metal detectorists share finds. Recently, a member matched the defaced boar crest on the knight's armor to a lesser-known Anjou cadet branch, rewriting part of the timeline. Reddit's r/historical cold cases hosts monthly deep dives, pooling skills, from heraldry experts to forensic animators, to recreate scenarios like the knight's final night. The key: approach with humility. Even seasoned researchers can miss details, like the amateur who realized a smudged journal entry was actually Arabic numerals, hinting at a secret negotiation with Saladin's forces. But with great detective power comes great responsibility. Ethical pitfalls lurk in historical sleuthing, from misinterpreting fragile sources to trespassing on protected sites. That tantalizing cave near Acre, it's on UNESCO radar after amateur diggers disturbed a potential burial layer last year. Always verify digital archives with academic databases to avoid hoaxes, and remember, every artifact tells a story, but removing it erases context forever. Even online, respect matters. When a genealogy enthusiast recently claimed to trace the knight's descendants, the backlash was swift. Living families deserve privacy, even from well-meaning curiosity. The Vanished Knight story isn't just for experts in ivory towers. It's a shared inheritance, a puzzle waiting for new solvers. Whether you're translating a monk's scribble in your pajamas or hiking the hills of Galilee, you're part of a tradition as old as the Crusades themselves, the human urge to chase shadows, to listen for whispers in the dark. And who knows, the next clue might be hiding in your browser history or under the next rock you turn. Digging into history isn't just about uncovering artifacts, it's about confronting the weight of the past and who has the right to disturb it. Take the knight's possible grave near Acre. Should archaeologists excavate, knowing the remains might belong to a man whose descendants, if found, never consented? Or do we leave the site untouched, preserving its sanctity but locking away answers forever? This isn't just academic debate, it's a moral tightrope. Indigenous communities worldwide have long argued that excavating ancestral remains reduces sacred history to spectacle. In Australia, Aboriginal elders successfully halted the study of ancient skeletons, insisting science couldn't outweigh spiritual connection. Similar tensions erupted in England when a medieval plague pit was unearthed for a shopping mall. Descendants called it a violation, while researchers saw a chance to study pandemic resilience. The case for excavation hinges on knowledge. Without examining the knight's remains, we might never confirm his identity, injuries, or cause of death, details that could rewrite Crusader history. Forensic science has revolutionized our understanding of medieval life, from diet to disease. When Richard III's skeleton was discovered under a Leicester parking lot, DNA analysis not only confirmed his brutal end but debunked centuries of Tudor propaganda. Yet every scrape of the trowel risks erasing context. In Jerusalem, hasty digs during the 90s disturbed Crusader-era Muslim graves, sparking outrage. Archaeology's golden rule, document first, dig second, often clashes with funding deadlines or public curiosity. Cultural sensitivity isn't just ethical, it's practical. In Cyprus, a team postponing their dig to consult local imams later uncovered a Templar chapel with intact frescoes because community trust led to tip-offs about nearby land. Contrast this with the uproar when a Danish museum displayed Inuit mummies without consent, reducing human lives to museum exhibits. The knight's armor, now displayed in Paris, raises similar questions. Is it a historical artifact or a man's dignity encased in glass? Some institutions now adopt shared stewardship, like the Glasgow Museum's returning looted Benin bronzes to Nigeria while retaining digital replicas for study. The knight's legacy transcends bones and rusted metal. He's become a symbol of vanished ideals, of history's unresolved wounds. In a Breton village, his name is invoked during veterans' vigils as a reminder of those lost to war's fog. Palestinian poets reimagine him as a bridge between Crusader and Arab narratives, his disappearance embodying shared tragedies. Perhaps that's the most compelling argument against disturbing his rest. Some mysteries aren't meant to be solved, but to remind us how much we don't and shouldn't control. After 8 centuries, the knight's greatest lesson might be that the past isn't ours to own, only to honor. The vanished knight is more than a historical footnote. He's become a mirror for our deepest anxieties and yearnings. His story resonates because it isn't just about a man who disappeared. It's about the universal human experience of unfinished journeys. Think of the Arthurian legends, where the quest for the Holy Grail often ends not in triumph, but in ambiguity. Like Percival or Gawain, our knight embodies the ache of the almost found, the truth that slips through our fingers just as we grasp it. Historians may debate the facts, but his legacy thrives in the spaces between where history blurs into myth and where every generation finds its own meaning in his absence. Consider how his tale parallels other enigmatic figures across cultures. The Japanese legend of the Ronin, masterless samurai wandering in self-imposed exile, echoes the knight's fractured loyalty. Or the Norse Draugr, warriors so bound by unfinished oaths they refuse to rest. Even in modern fiction, from the left hand of darkness to the road, we're drawn to characters who vanish into their own moral wilderness. What unites these stories isn't the details, but the emotion they evoke, that haunting sense of roads not taken, of vows left unresolved. The knight's mystery endures because it taps into something primal, our fear of being erased, and our hope that even the lost might one day be remembered. But his symbolism cuts deeper than personal allegory. On a grander scale, he represents the Crusades themselves, an era of soaring ideals and crushing disillusionment. The Holy Wars promised redemption, yet delivered chaos. Knights who set out as saviors became, in too many cases, oppressors or casualties. His vanishing acts as a metaphor for the entire enterprise's fractured promise. Like the abandoned castles of the Levant, their walls now home to scorpions and swallows, his story is a ruin of what might have been. Yet there's a quieter, more intimate dimension to his legacy. For some, he's a cautionary tale about the cost of blind faith. For others, a rebel who dared to walk away from a broken system. A Syrian poet once wrote of him as Al-Muntasir, the one who withdraws, not out of cowardice but clarity. That duality is what makes him so compelling. He can be both traitor and truth-teller, depending on who's holding the lens. So what does he mean to you? A warning, a kindred spirit, or simply a shadow on the edge of history, reminding us how easily even the bravest can fade from view? However you see him, his greatest lesson might be this: Some stories aren't meant to be solved, but to unsettle us, to linger like twilight, neither day nor night, urging us to question what we think we know. And as we turn now to the final reckoning of his tale, remember, the most enduring mysteries aren't those with answers, but those that keep us asking. 8 centuries have passed since the knight rode into the desert night, yet his story lingers like the last ember of a dying fire, dimmed but never fully extinguished. From the fragmented whispers of medieval chronicles to the high-tech forensics labs of today, we've chased his shadow across battlefields, through encrypted letters, and into the silent spaces where history bleeds into legend. The armor stacked beneath an olive tree, the defaced crest, the cryptic folktales, each clue is a thread in a tapestry woven as much by time as by human hands. What began as a historical footnote has become something far richer, a parable about how easily one life can slip through the cracks of memory and how stubbornly the past clings to its mysteries. This knight's journey mirrors our own relationship with history. We sift through the debris of bygone eras, piecing together narratives from what was saved, what was erased, and what was never written down at all. His vanishing act, whether born of betrayal, crisis of conscience, or something more inscrutable, forces us to confront how little we truly know about even the most documented periods. The Crusades were an age of grand chronicles and louder voices, yet half its actors left barely a footprint. That tension between the recorded and the lost is what makes his tale so magnetic. It's not just a detective story, it's a meditation on how history is made and who gets to decide which stories endure. Think of what we've uncovered: a man caught between faith and pragmatism, between the Templars' rigid hierarchy and the chaotic reality of the Holy Land. His defaced armor suggests a deliberate unmasking. His dagger's ritual break hints at an oath shattered. Yet for every answer, a dozen questions bloom. Why would a knight abandon his identity but leave his costly gear behind? Was his disappearance an act of penance or rebellion? These aren't just academic puzzles, they're windows into the human condition, into the timeless struggles of duty, doubt, and the search for meaning in the fog of war. What keeps us riveted isn't just the mystery, but what it reveals about ourselves. In an age of surveillance and digital permanence, the knight's ability to vanish utterly feels like a relic of a lost world. His story taps into our deepest anxieties about erasure and legacy, while offering the tantalizing fantasy of starting anew. He's become a canvas for our hopes and fears, a cautionary tale about loyalty's price, a symbol of resistance, even a romantic fugitive fleeing a corrupt system. The truth, of course, is messier and more compelling. As the historian Mark Bloch once wrote, "The past is never dead. It is not even past." The knight's enigma endures because it refuses neat resolution, reminding us that history isn't a locked chest but a conversation, one where every generation gets to ask new questions. Perhaps that's why, after all these years, we're still combing archives and scanning soil, still turning his story over in our hands like a worn coin. Not just to solve him, but to understand ourselves through the lens of his silence. So what do you think happened to the knight who vanished? Was he a heretic, a hero, or simply a man who reached his breaking point? Drop your theories in the comments. We're building a community of history detectives here, and your perspective might just uncover the next clue. If you've enjoyed this deep dive into the shadows of the past, hit subscribe and join us as we keep unraveling the threads of history's greatest mysteries. Because the most fascinating stories aren't the ones with tidy endings, they're the ones that keep us wondering long after the final page.